Imagine this. An ordinary girl from Boston, dreaming of true love and a beautiful life, takes a desperate step for a man who doesn't even know she exists. But can she really get everything she's ever wanted? When behind the glittering facade lie secrets, intrigue, and dangerous games? This story will change the way you think about love, betrayal, and the true price of happiness. A secret behind the mask. Scarlett Brooks had been living in Boston for 5 years. She rented a tiny apartment on the 3rd floor of an old brick building, worked as a waitress at the trendy Luxe restaurant, and came home every night exhausted, but with the feeling that all of this was only temporary. She dreamed of more, but for now her life felt like an endless loop. Morning coffee, the subway, her shift, fatigue, sleep. Scarlett had been working at Luxe for 2 years. The restaurant was popular among the rich and famous. Politicians, businessmen, actors were regulars. But the one who caught her attention most was a frequent guest. Alexander Rivers. Tall, with a perfect smile and always dressed in expensive suits, he was the embodiment of success and masculine charm. He was always accompanied by different women, models, actresses, socialites. Scarlett knew he was a heartbreaker, a playboy, and seemed to notice no one but his companions. She served him cocktails and brought his meals, but he never once looked her in the eye. To him, she was just part of the scenery, like the marble tables or crystal chandeliers. But to Scarlett, he became an obsession. She found herself thinking about him even at home, imagining the day he might finally notice her, smile, and start a conversation. One evening, when the restaurant was packed, Alexander arrived with yet another date. Scarlett was assigned to their table. She tried to be invisible, but deep down she hoped he would at least glance her way. But he was completely absorbed in his companion, laughing and whispering in her ear. Scarlett felt a pang of jealousy and suddenly realized she couldn't go on like this. She wanted to be in those women's place. She wanted Alexander to look only at her. That night, lying in her cramped room, Scarlett made a decision. She would change her life. She would become someone impossible to ignore, the kind of woman men lose their heads over. She didn't know exactly how, but she was sure she could do it. The next morning, Scarlett woke up with an unusual sense of determination. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel tired, just excited and a little anxious. Thoughts raced through her mind. What if I really can do this? What if everything changes? During her break, she went to a small cafe across from the restaurant, pulled out a notebook and started making a plan. She honestly wrote down everything she didn't like about herself. Her nose was too wide, her lips too thin, her hair dull, her wardrobe boring. She knew it was harsh, but she couldn't help it. If she wanted Alexander to notice her, she had to become someone else. That same day, she booked a consultation with a plastic surgeon. The doctor was polite but surprised. "You're a very beautiful girl, why do you want all this?" he asked. Scarlett just smiled. "I want a change." She chose everything: rhinoplasty, lip augmentation, a facelift, cheekbone correction. The doctor named the price. Scarlett's eyes widened. She didn't have anywhere near that kind of money. That evening back home, she stared at herself in the mirror for a long time. "I can do this," she told herself. The next day she applied for a bank loan. Her income was modest, but she lied and said she was a manager at the restaurant. A week later, the money was in her account. Scarlett began her transformation. Surgeries, pain, bruises, months of recovery. She endured it all without complaint. At the same time, she changed her wardrobe, choosing expensive dresses, high heels, stylish accessories. She took makeup classes, learned to style her hair, and take care of her skin. Every day, she looked less and less like the Scarlett who once served coffee at Lux. 6 months later, she returned to the restaurant, not as a waitress but as a guest. That evening, Alexander was there, sitting at his favorite table with yet another new date. Scarlett walked past him without looking, but she felt his gaze on her. Her heart pounded. She sat at the bar, ordered a cocktail, and pretended to be busy on her phone. A few minutes later, a waiter approached her. "Mr. Rivers invites you to join him at his table." Scarlett smiled. She stood up slowly and, trying not to show her nerves, walked over to Alexander's table. He looked at her with an interest he'd never shown before. His date, noticing the change in his attention, frowned, but Alexander was completely absorbed by his new guest. "Please have a seat," he said, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. "Have we met before?" Scarlett smiled, tilting her head slightly. "Maybe you just never noticed me." Alexander laughed, and his date, feeling out of place, soon found an excuse to leave. Now they were alone. Scarlett felt herself trembling inside, but outwardly she was calm and confident. "You're very beautiful," Alexander said, not taking his eyes off her. "What do you do?" "I just got back from Europe," Scarlett lied. "I worked in fashion." She had prepared her story in advance. New documents, social media accounts, photos from Paris and Milan taken in a studio. Also, she could seem like the kind of woman he might be interested in. They talked for hours that night. Alexander was charming and witty, but Scarlett never let her guard down. She knew he was used to women throwing themselves at him. But now things were different. Now she was playing by her own rules. When the evening ended, Alexander offered her a ride home. Scarlett refused, saying she preferred a taxi. She saw that her refusal stung him and realized his interest was piqued. She couldn't sleep all night. His words, his gaze, his slight smile kept replaying in her mind. She knew this was just the beginning, and ahead lay a real game with very high stakes. The next day, Alexander messaged her first. He found her Instagram profile, the one Scarlett had created for her new life. In his message, he invited her to dinner at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Scarlett didn't reply right away, waiting a bit so as not to seem too eager. That evening, she chose her best dress, did her makeup to highlight her new features, and went to meet him. Alexander was flawless as always. He ordered wine, told stories about his travels, joked, and listened attentively to her answers. Scarlett caught herself starting to believe in her new role. "You're very mysterious," he said as dinner was ending. "I feel like you have secrets." Scarlett smiled. Who doesn't? They walked through the city at night, and for the first time Alexander took her hand. In that moment, Scarlett felt her plan was working. But along with that came fear. What if he found out the truth? What if everything she worked for collapsed? In the weeks that followed, they saw each other regularly. Alexander took her to private parties, introduced her to influential people, showered her with expensive gifts. Scarlett felt like she was living in a dream, but the loan weighed heavily on her. She knew she'd have to talk to him about money sooner or later. One evening, as they sat in his penthouse overlooking the city, Scarlett took a deep breath. "Alexander, I have a favor to ask." He looked at her intently. "Go ahead." "I need some money. I'm in a difficult situation." She tried to sound confident, but inside she was terrified. Alexander didn't ask questions. He simply said, "How much?" Scarlett named a sum. exaggerating her debt a little. Alexander nodded. "I'll help you." Scarlett smiled, but inside she felt a chill. She knew their relationship had changed. Now there was not just passion between them, but also a debt and a secret she had to keep at any cost. She tried not to think about owing Alexander. She told herself everything was under control, that it was just part of her plan. But with each day the tension grew. Alexander became more attentive, sometimes asking about her past, her family, her work in Europe. Scarlett answered confidently, but inside she was more and more afraid he'd notice inconsistencies. One evening, as they were having dinner at his place, Alexander suddenly asked, "Why do you never talk about your parents?" Scarlett froze for a second, but quickly regained her composure. "We're not very close. They live in another state and we rarely talk." Alexander nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Scarlett realized he was starting to suspect something. That night she couldn't sleep. Thoughts raced through her mind. What if he finds out the truth? What if everything she worked for falls apart in an instant? She decided to be more careful, to talk less about herself and listen more. Meanwhile, Alexander was staying late at work more often, sometimes not answering her messages. Scarlett felt a distance growing between them. She tried to win back his attention, arranging romantic dinners, buying expensive gifts with his money, but it was all in vain. One day she saw a message on his phone from an unknown woman. "Thank you for last night. It was wonderful." Scarlett's heart sank. She realized Alexander hadn't changed. He was still seeing other women despite their relationship. For the first time Scarlett wondered, was all of this worth it? Was her new life, her lies, and her pain really worth being with a man who would never truly be hers? Scarlett tried to convince herself that everything was under control, but the anxiety wouldn't go away. She started checking Alexander's phone more often, catching him in small inconsistencies, looking for proof of her suspicions. One day while he was in the shower, she couldn't resist and opened his laptop. There, in his email, she found conversations with several women, photos, invitations to dinners. Scarlett felt something inside her break. She remembered why she started this game, to be noticed, to become special. But now she was just one of many, just another pretty toy that could be replaced. That same evening, she decided to talk to Alexander. They sat in the living room and Scarlett, gathering all her courage, asked, "Are you seeing someone else?" Alexander didn't deny it. "I never promised you fidelity, Scarlett. You knew who I was." His words were like a slap in the face. She didn't cry, didn't make a scene. She simply stood up and left without looking back. Scarlett left Alexander without drama, but with a deep sense of emptiness. She didn't cry, the tears seemed to have run out. A new chapter began in her life, one with no room for illusions or painful dreams. However, despite the pain, Scarlett understood. Her romance with Alexander had given her more than just disappointment. Thanks to that relationship, she was able to pay off all her debts, and the connections she made at parties and dinners opened new doors for her. Now she knew many influential people, businessmen, lawyers, gallery owners, and even a few politicians. Some were interested in her. Others simply respected her for her poise and conversation. Scarlett realized her past experience wasn't a failure, but a valuable lesson. She wasn't going to give up on her dream, to marry a wealthy and influential man. Now she acted even smarter and more cautiously. Scarlett continued to attend exclusive parties, exhibitions, and charity auctions where the elite gathered. She always looked impeccable, carried herself with confidence but without arrogance, knew how to listen, and when to make a witty remark. At one such event, she met Edward Hastings, the owner of an investment fund, a man with a flawless reputation and a mysterious past. Edward was 10 years older than Scarlett, but looked younger than his age. Tall, fit, with an ironic smile and attentive eyes. He was surrounded by women's attention, but didn't seem in a hurry to get close to anyone. Their acquaintance began with a playful exchange. Scarlett noticed Edward watching her from afar and approached him herself, offering a glass of champagne. "You seem to be the only one here who is bored," she said, smiling. "And you're the only one who noticed," he replied. From that evening, a game began between them. They met at various events, exchanged short but meaningful conversations full of hints and unspoken words. Edward didn't rush to ask Scarlett out, and she didn't show too much initiative, though inside she was bubbling with excitement. One day, he invited her to a private dinner at an exclusive club. The evening was full of surprises. Edward turned out to be not only a smart conversationalist but also a great storyteller, and his stories were full of mysteries. He didn't talk about himself directly, but sometimes dropped phrases that made Scarlett wonder what was true and what was just part of the game. "Are you always this mysterious?" she asked as dinner was ending. "Only with those who deserve it," he replied, a spark in his eyes. Their relationship developed quickly, but didn't get any simpler. Scarlett felt that Edward was not as simple as he seemed. He could disappear for several days without answering messages, then reappear with a bouquet of rare flowers and tickets to the opera. He didn't talk about his business, but sometimes hinted at important meetings and trips. Scarlett kept up. She didn't reveal all her cards either, skillfully maintained the intrigue, sometimes disappeared herself to let him feel the thrill of the chase. Their relationship was like a dance, vivid, passionate, full of secrets and mutual respect. Soon Scarlett realized she had met a worthy opponent and perhaps the very man for whom it was all worth it. Scarlett and Edward became the couple everyone whispered about at social gatherings. Their appearances together were always an event. She, a mysterious beauty with a sharp mind; he, an influential businessman with a legendary past. But behind the outward harmony was a complex game, where each was both hunter and prey. Edward was in no hurry to open up. He could be incredibly attentive and generous, arranging rooftop dinners, inviting her to private screenings, giving her jewelry you couldn't buy in a regular store. But if she asked about his family or childhood, he would immediately change the subject, joke, or simply disappear for a few days. Scarlett didn't push, but she watched. She noticed how he sometimes got nervous around certain people, avoided photographers, always sat with his back to the wall in restaurants. She understood. Edward had secrets, and those secrets could be dangerous. In return, she didn't reveal everything either. Scarlett maintained the image of a successful, independent woman who didn't need a protector. She talked about her consulting successes, new projects, but kept quiet about her past, her surgeries, and how she really got into this world. Their relationship was full of bright moments. They took spontaneous trips. Once Edward invited Scarlett to Chicago for the weekend, not telling her where they were going until they were at the airport. Another time she organized a quest for him through nighttime Boston, with puzzles and surprises at every stage. But behind the fun, there was always a sense of something left unsaid. One night, as they were returning from a party, Scarlett noticed a black SUV following them. Edward pretended not to notice, but the next day canceled all his meetings and left the city for a week. When he returned, Scarlett didn't make a scene. She simply asked, "Do you trust me?" Edward looked her in the eyes and for the first time answered honestly, "I want to trust you, but I can't. Not yet." Scarlett realized he wasn't the only one with secrets. Their relationship balanced between passion and mistrust, between the desire to be together and the fear of losing control. Soon, Scarlett received an anonymous letter. Inside were photos of Edward with another woman and a short note. "He's not who he says he is." Instead of making a scene, Scarlett decided to find out the truth herself. She began her own investigation, using the connections she'd made over the past months. The more she learned, the more she realized Edward really wasn't who he seemed. His business was risky, and his past was tied to dangerous people. But she herself was not as simple as she appeared, either. Their relationship became even more intense and sharp. Now it was not just a romance, but a real game of survival, where the stakes were too high to make a mistake. Scarlett couldn't get the anonymous letter out of her head. She acted carefully, not letting on that she knew anything. With the help of one of her new acquaintances, a private detective she'd once flirted with at a party, she started gathering information about Edward. Soon, the truth came out. Edward Hastings was not just the owner of an investment fund. His name appeared in several high-profile investigations involving money laundering and corporate espionage. In the past, he had been connected to one of New York's most powerful families, but after a scandal, he disappeared from the press and started a new life in Boston under a different name. His ties to the criminal world weren't obvious, but strong enough to keep him constantly on edge. Scarlett wasn't scared, on the contrary, her excitement only grew. She understood that now their relationship was not just a game, but a dangerous match, where not only feelings but freedom, maybe even life, were at stake. One evening when Edward returned from another business trip, Scarlett met him at her apartment. She made dinner, lit candles, but there was steel in her eyes. "I know who you are," she said quietly when they were alone. "And I know what you're hiding." Edward didn't deny it. He sat across from her, was silent for a long time, then began to speak. He told her about his past, about how he had to flee New York to save not only himself but his family, about how he was betrayed by those closest to him, and how he learned to trust no one, about how his business was not just about money, but a constant fight for survival. "I never wanted to drag you into this," he said, "but you're too smart not to notice." Scarlett listened carefully. She realized that for the first time in a long time, someone was speaking to her honestly without masks or games. She told him about herself, how she changed her appearance to get into this world, about her debts, about how she used men for her own gain, but always dreamed of real love and respect. "We're both not who we pretend to be," she said. "But maybe that's why we found each other." Edward smiled for the first time that evening. A new feeling arose between them, not just passion or excitement, but respect and understanding. Now they were equals, both with dark pasts, both with secrets, both willing to risk everything for the future. From that night on, their relationship changed. They became allies, confiding their secrets to each other and making plans for a future where there was no room for lies. Together, they were stronger than they had ever been alone. One evening, Scarlett and Edward were invited to an exclusive reception in a luxurious penthouse overlooking the Boston skyline. The guests were the crème de la crème of society: investors, politicians, art collectors. Scarlett dazzled in an elegant black dress, And Edward, as always, was impeccable. They stayed close but each played their own game. Scarlett light, witty, attentive to details. Edward reserved, observant, confident. At one point, as Scarlett was admiring the paintings on the wall, she felt someone's gaze on her. Turning around, she saw Alexander. He was with a new companion, a striking blonde in a red dress. Alexander froze, not believing his eyes. His face was momentarily confused, but he quickly regained his usual mask of confidence. "Scarlett," he said, approaching, his voice surprised and slightly tense. "Alexander," she replied calmly, smiling slightly. Edward, noticing their conversation, came over and stood beside Scarlett, gently placing his hand on her waist. Alexander glanced at him, and a flicker of recognition, and a hint of jealousy, crossed his face. "I didn't expect to see you here," Alexander said to Scarlett, but was clearly sizing up Edward as well. "It's a small world," she replied, maintaining her composure. Alexander's companion, sensing the tension, tried to start a polite conversation, but Alexander was completely focused on Scarlett. He asked questions, inquired about her life, hinted at the past, but Scarlett answered easily and evasively, giving him no reason for gossip. Edward watched their exchange with a slight smile, but his gaze was attentive. He understood that Alexander was part of Scarlett's past, but he didn't feel threatened. On the contrary, he was even a little pleased to see how confidently and gracefully his partner handled herself. At one point, Alexander tried to get her alone, but Scarlett gently yet firmly made it clear that their conversation was over. She returned to Edward, and together they melted into the crowd, leaving Alexander with his companion and his thoughts. After that evening, Alexander couldn't find peace. Memories of Scarlett, of who she used to be and who she had become, kept running through his mind. She looked confident, happy, and beside her was a man respected by even the most influential guests. Alexander felt anger and envy. He couldn't accept that Scarlett had not only escaped his orbit, but had apparently found her place in a world where he had always wanted to be on top. He thought she didn't deserve this happiness, that her success was just a lucky mask hiding the same old past. That night, unable to sleep, Alexander came up with a plan. He knew more about Scarlett's past than anyone. Her debts, her plastic surgeries, how she had manipulated men for her own gain. He was sure Edward didn't know the whole truth. If he finds out who she really is, Alexander thought, their perfect union will fall apart. The next day, Alexander found Edward's contacts through mutual acquaintances and arranged a meeting under the pretense of a business discussion. Edward was surprised by the invitation but agreed. The meeting took place in an upscale restaurant. Alexander started with small talk, business, investments, mutual acquaintances. But soon he got to the point. "I want to talk about Scarlett," he said, watching Edward's reaction closely. Edward showed neither surprise nor irritation, just nodded. "I'm listening." Alexander began to tell him about how Scarlett had changed her appearance to get into high society, about her debts, about how she used men for her own benefit. He hinted at her past, her lies, that she wasn't who she claimed to be. When Alexander finished, Edward calmly looked him in the eye and with a slight smile said, "Alexander, you might be surprised, but I know everything about Scarlett. She's been honest with me from the very beginning. And if you thought you could shock me or influence our relationship, you've wasted your time." Alexander froze, not expecting such a response. His confidence instantly vanished, and his face showed confusion. He realized his plan had failed, and he looked foolish and pathetic. "Thank you for your concern," Edward added. "But I don't need advice from others. I value honesty and strength, not gossip. And I choose for myself whom to trust." Alexander left the restaurant humiliated and empty. His attempt to destroy Scarlett's happiness had not only failed but had made him look even worse. After the meeting with Alexander, Edward didn't say a word to Scarlett about their conversation. He didn't want to worry her or drag her back into a past she had worked so hard to leave behind. Deep down, Edward felt a confidence in Scarlett that he had never felt for any other woman. Everything Alexander tried to use against her only strengthened his feelings and respect. This situation made Edward think about the future. He realized he didn't want any more doubts or outside interference in their lives. He wanted to be with Scarlett always, not as a temporary partner, but as a husband, a friend, a true companion. One evening, as the city sparkled with lights and the view from their rooftop stretched over all of Boston, Edward invited Scarlett to dinner. He was calm, but there was something special in his eyes. After dessert, he stood up, took her hand, and looking straight into her eyes said, "You've come a long way, Scarlett. I know everything about you, and that's exactly why I love you. You're strong, smart, and real. Now I want you to be my wife." Scarlett froze, not believing her ears. The dream she had once changed her whole life for had finally come true. But now she was truly ready for it, with an open heart and no fear. "Yes," she whispered, tears of happiness shining in her eyes. Their journey had been long and difficult, full of trials, mistakes, and victories. But now they knew, it had all been worth it. Scarlett had found not only love but confidence in herself and Edward, a woman he could trust completely. Scarlett and Edward's wedding became the event of the year in Boston's high society. But for them, the day was less about luxury and more about overcoming the past and starting a new, honest life. Scarlett walked down the aisle with her head held high, knowing that her happiness was the result not just of dreams, but of strength, intelligence, patience, and faith in herself. After the wedding, they went on a short trip around Europe, where for the first time Scarlett allowed herself to simply be happy, without looking back. Edward was by her side, attentive, reliable, sincere. They talked a lot, made plans, laughed, and enjoyed every moment. The past no longer had power over her. Scarlett knew that everything she had been through had made her stronger and wiser. She had found not only love but self-respect, and her story became an inspiration for many. Now, when she looked at Edward, she saw not just the man she loved, but a true friend with whom she could face any challenge. Their happiness was well earned, and ahead of them were new dreams and new heights to reach together. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed this story, please share your thoughts and impressions in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinion. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new, exciting, and dramatic love stories.